tough. I felt like it was important for me to say some things. But then when I sat down to figure out what I was going to say, it was tough. What do you say? How can you possibly? Damn it, sorry. What can you possibly say to capture your appreciation for someone's whole life? Not just someone you loved. Sheesh, this is going to be a long one, sorry. And not just someone you loved, but someone who had always been there for you, your dad. Fortunately, I realized, there are no words that you can possibly say, no anecdotes you can possibly relate that would be sufficient to encompass the admiration and love that I feel for Jack, my dad. So I realized maybe the thing to do was talk about a few of the things that I learned from him. But first, I have a huge benefit over most people. The fact of the matter is, my whole life I've had two dads. My natural father and my stepfather, Jack. In the movies, they always kind of portray that as a problematic or a tough situation. And maybe it is for some, but it wouldn't ever was for me. The idea never even occurred to me, thanks. Oh, boy. For me, it was always a source of great advantage and something that I'll always be grateful for. This is about Jack. And while there's not time to go through the many things that he taught me or all the things I learned from all the years sharing life with him, I wanted to talk about just a few of the most important ones to me. Discipline, service, the world, and love and devotion. Of course, with a 21-year career in the Marine Corps, I learned a thing or two about discipline from Jack. While he retired at the top of the enlisted ladder as a master sergeant, the time I remember him most was as gunny, a gunnery sergeant. I remember him being called gunny at work, and that carried a lot of respect. And he had a way of transmitting that authority that's really hard to forget. He had a booming voice, an icy stare, and if you were being dressed down by Dad, well, there was no missing his authority. You also knew that flight is sometimes a much stronger reaction than fight. I remember when I was in junior high, I loved kicking a soccer ball against the big wall on the side of our house. I spent hours doing it. Dad, on the other hand, didn't really love it. In fact, it was pretty clear that he didn't like it at all. And so I learned to avoid doing it when he was home. Anywhere near home, frankly. Back then, we lived a long way from my school, and I was usually up early, waiting on the bus. As early as I was up, Dad was already at work by the time I got up. So one morning, I was waiting. The soccer ball was there. I couldn't help it. I started kicking it up against the wall. It wasn't until I heard the screen door on the other side of the house slam open and slam closed that I remembered that he was at home, ostensibly sleeping in to dodge a cold or something. Well, he didn't have to say anything for me to know I was in trouble. I could tell by the way he came around the corner, naked, moving fast, and what I remember to be a really unpleasant look on his face. It created a lasting impression when he grabbed me by the front of my jacket and easily lifted me into the air several feet until we were face to face to have a discussion. I learned, though, I've never kicked that ball against the wall when he was home, ever. A side note, I also learned that once seen, there are some things that can't be unseen. And they stay with you, I promise you. Yeah, Jack was good at making an impression. Not just on me, but on my friends, too. When I was just 8 or 9, my friend Matt and I would spend hours upon hours joking about how absurd it was to imagine saying no to Jack. We'd be staying over at one another's house on a weekend night, and as we went to sleep, we'd make up these stories about Jack telling us to do something. Take out the trash, weed the yard, pick up a mess, and then we'd imagine just casually saying, no. We'd roll with laughter before conjuring up another scenario. So given that as a backdrop, I think you can also appreciate the bravest thing I ever participated in when I was a kid, also including Matt. Matt and I had been at the bowling alley on base one afternoon, and Jack picked us up when he got off duty. He left us in the car and ran into the PX to grab something. And I have to imagine it was Matt's idea, because I can't believe that I would be brave enough to do this myself. But we decided to turn on the radio and set the volume full blast. Oh. And just for good measure, we also turned the windshield wipers on as fast as they would go. And of course, in those days, if you took the keys with you, you had no idea that had happened. So we sat back and waited for him to return. And as he got back in the car and started to put the keys into the ignition, I instantly learned something else: regret. But as you can see, I survived all my appendages. Thankfully, so did Matt. But I recall as I returned and climbed into the car, there was an eerie stillness and a suffocating quiet. Everything happened in painful slow motion as I inserted and turned the key. And the music was immediately deafening. And the rapid motion of the wipers just added to a surreal ambiance. As you know, Jack was a tall man. Sorry. So he didn't have far to go to smash his head loudly into the roof as he exploded off the seat. When he returned to a sitting position, he didn't yell. He didn't give us that kind of Jack gaze of death. He did something much scarier. He was incredibly still, completely calm, as he slowly turned off the wipers and the radio and began to whistle as he started the car and slowly drove us home. When we got home, likewise, nothing. The fact of the matter is, he never mentioned it. Nothing the next morning after Matt and I passed the night in complete panic. We didn't speak about it for probably 20 years more. I brought it up when I was fairly certain the statute of limitations had expired. And then we simply laughed about it together. So while he was definitely a man of discipline and authority and swift justice, he was also a man of mercy. When the occasion called for it, he could be a strict disciplinarian, but he also taught me about service, as Mike's talked about. That kind of service is defined in the dictionary: the occupation or function of serving, contribution to the welfare of others, the work performed by one that serves. Clearly, there was this time in the armed services. Dad joined the Marine Corps, a department of the Navy, or as he always said, the men's department of the Navy, when he was 17. And like his brother, my Uncle Mike, served in Vietnam. I was too young to remember much, and it wasn't until he returned from one of his tours that he and my mother were married. And while I don't remember too much from that time, I remember plenty of his time in the service, as he didn't retire from the Marines until I was almost out of high school. So I learned about serving your country. He also taught me that valor and rank are two different things entirely. Dad was enlisted. During all my years of growing up around the armed services, time spent with fathers of my friends, many of whom were senior officers, generals, admirals, you name it. My time spent on and around bases, at various military ceremonies, at air shows. I was never around anyone of any rank whose chest was festooned with as many ribbons and medals as my dad. He never drew attention to his service or his medals. It wasn't that he was unwilling to talk about it. It's just that you had to ask him about it. He never brought it up or dwelt on it like others that I've met or known. For some reason I can't explain, I was uncomfortable talking to him about it, so I guess I figured that if he didn't talk about it in his own time, that maybe it was best left alone. Ultimately, I had to learn about the circumstances of his death